calendar shift during this period, which I've also put up there on the bullet. And as you can see, he dabbled in so many different things there. And we'll cover some of those in more detail as we go through this. He was actually born out of wedlock. His father had lots of children, some of them legitimate, some of them illegitimate, and these half-siblings caused him problems later on in life when the inheritance was to be disputed. This is the family tree over on the right. There's his father at the top. Well, actually, no, it's the great-grandfather at the top. And originally, they were Florentine notaries. It was Leonardo's father that changed profession, and we find him becoming a farmer and a landowner. And as I said, Leonardo had lots of half-siblings, as you can see from that family tree. He was born in this house in 1452, Anciano. It's still there, you can go visit it. We don't know much about the very early part of Leonardo's life. Nothing is documented about that, so that's a subject of conjecture. One can only imagine the kind of life that he would live in this house. He was born in Anciano, as I said. His father was in Vinci. He was living with his mother in the early part of his life for the first few years, and then he moved to Vinci, and of course he ends up a lot of time in Florence, but we'll get to Florence as we go through this talk. So, moves from the mother to the father and the uncle. He's living there. He's apprenticed to Verrocchio, and it is there he learns a lot of skills that serve him very much in later life. And I've listed them all there. Over on the right is one of Leonardo's early drawings, and you can already see the skill that he's bringing to charcoal and paper just from that very simple drawing. In 1472, at the age of 20, he qualifies in the Guild of St. Luke, and that's a guild of the physician of the time. When I say physician, it's not like physicians of our time, but that is the Guild of Physicians and Artists. It's all rolled up into one in those days. He's working with Verrocchio. He's learning sculpting, he's learning painting, and he's learning how to use gold. The painting over on the right is a painting by Verrocchio, and Leonardo contributed to that painting. He did the angels in the lower left, which we'll look at in just a second. He's 23 years old when he does this, and you can find this painting in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Did anybody go to Florence? A few of you? Did you get wet? Yes, no? You did get wet? Oh. Yeah, we got wet staying here too. Look at the work on the fabric of these two. It is said by Vasari, Vasari published a big book, biography of all the masters of the time. Michelangelo is in this, as is Leonardo and a number of other very well-known painters. And Vasari himself was quite a famous artist. And according to Vasari, when Verrocchio saw the work that Leonardo did in that thing that you see on the lower left, on the right-hand side of the screen, the fabric of those two, he put down his brushes and never painted again, having recognized the absolute mastery of the art by Leonardo. Now, in 1476, Leonardo was thrown in jail. He was accused of sodomy, but when it came to trial, none of the witnesses came forward. It was an anonymous charge, and surprisingly enough, at this period in time in Italy, a lot of people were accused and participated in sodomy. It wasn't as unusual as one might think. At this time, he's doing a number of other works, and I've listed them there. And the bottom bullet, of course, is very important, because this plagues Leonardo all through his life. never completing things. What a great procrastinator he actually turned out to be. A number of very significant projects that he began were never completed, and well, more of that as we go along. He's employed by the Duke of Milan during 1482 to 99. Then he bounces around at a few different places in Italy, as you see there. Finally goes back to Florence in 1500 and is working for Caesar Borgia, and that's his patron at that time. It is during this period that he travels around Italy quite a bit. In 1503, he does the Battle of Anghiari. There's a copy there. We don't actually have that painting. And he begins the Mona Lisa. And we all know about the Mona Lisa. And some of you, of course, have seen the Mona Lisa. In 1506 in Milan, he does the Virgin on the Rocks. We find one in the National Gallery and one in the Louvre, and there are pictures of those two down at the bottom. He's not very prolific when it comes to paintings, but I'll be going through those actual numbers when we get to them. 1507, remember I said he had lots of half-siblings, and he runs into problems with the inheritance there. Over on the right, we see a self-portrait of Leonardo later in life. He's in 1508 in Milan, financed by patrons again. One of them is King Louis of France, and King Louis of France becomes very significant in Leonardo's story towards the end of his life. And in 1513 to 16, he's doing work for the Vatican. Over on the left, we have St. John the Baptist, which was done for the Vatican. In the middle, we have a reconstruction of an automaton lion that he created for King Louis of France. When it was struck by a whip a few times, the side panels would open up, and you would see the fleur-de-lis, and it would also growl. The king was very impressed with that. Lots of writings, which we have, but did he ever publish them? No. He was secret in this respect. And in fact, even his writings were kept secret. He would do mirror writing, in other words, writing backwards to try and hide the meaning. He would join words together to try and obscure what it was. He would substitute letters, so again, it wasn't clear what the word was. Why was he trying to hide this? Was it just secrecy, or was he trying to keep it away from the church? Well, we don't really know that, but it could well be that he was trying to hide information from the church because he was on the edge of being heretical. This is an example of the mirror writing that Leonardo does, and we have lots of his writings dotted around the world in various codexes. This is a drawing from one of his writings, and look at the quality of it. And what he said himself about his own writings: "Let no man who is not a mathematician read the elements of my work." And indeed, he was very well versed in the sciences of the times, mathematics being one of them. He wrote lots of notebooks, sketches, inventions, architecture, you name it, it's in his notebooks. Even grocery lists and lists of people who owed him money, that's all in his notebooks. And they were originally loose leaf, they've been combined together. So these collections that we understand as codexes, he didn't write them as books, it's just that we have now collected these things together and put them together. One of them, the Codex Leicester, Bill Gates had, and he bought it in Christie's for 30 million. And he allows people access to that at certain times. And there's an example of that codex over on the right. They're dotted around in various museums. One's in the Louvre, one's in Britain, one's in the V&A Museum there. In the notebooks, again, look at the quality of the drawings. Where that red circle is, interestingly, there is a fingerprint. And the fingerprint is on the right side of the screen, and that's Leonardo's fingerprint. So we've got his fingerprints. Not that it does us any good, but he left a mark there. This is one of his drawings. This is an early known dated work, in fact the earliest known dated work that we've got from him. What's interesting about this is there are no people in this. It's a landscape. Traditionally, when drawings and paintings were done at this period, there were always people in there, somewhere. This is where he lived. The Uffizi Gallery has studied this. It's known as 8P, and it shows evidence that he could draw with both hands. He was originally left-handed when he was born, but learned to use his right hand when I suppose he was being schooled. No people in the Arno Valley, and that's where he lived. Here's a blow-up of it, so you can appreciate better his skill in drawing the Arno Valley. And down at the bottom, there's his name, Leonardo, down the bottom. What about paintings? Was he prolific? No, I already gave that away, so I can't ask you that question as a trivia question. We've only got 15 works that we know about, either in whole or large part. 6 are actually disputed still. 4 have been recently attributed to him, and 2 are copies of lost works. So in other words, we don't have the original, we've only got a copy of what he did by some other painter. None of them are signed. So it is the way he puts the paintings together that they have been identified. And here's 2 examples of Leonardo's work. There's another one. This is Leonard da Vinci. This is in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. I have a copy in my library at home. It's an absolutely wonderful picture. The slide here on the screen doesn't do it justice. If you go see this in the Smithsonian, when you see it, it glows at you. Has anybody seen it? Just us? Well, put it on your bucket list to go see that in the Smithsonian in Washington. Absolutely lovely. Do we remember this one that was recently found? Salvator Mundi. What a story. Painted in about 1500 for the King of France. Somehow it gets to England, to Charles I, then it goes to his son, Charles II, and then James, and then we lose track of it. We don't know, it bounces around, and finally it's picked up in auction in 2005 for about $10,000 in New Orleans. I guess somebody had a feeling for it. They restored it, they had it studied, the provenance was established. This is what it looks like after the restoration. And then in 2017, it sold for $450 million to some unknown person. So we don't actually know where this is anymore. But that's the Salvator Mundi. There's a couple of other examples. These are both in the Hermitage. They are both briefly filmed. They're both referenced in the film The Da Vinci Code. 2 Madonnas. Now, unlike the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, that is behind a plastic screen, which is behind a herd of Chinese or Asian people with their cameras up in the air. At least every time I've been there, that's what it's been like. These are right in front of your face with nothing in between you and the painting. You can literally get within a few millimeters of these canvases, and we've both seen them. It's remarkable. This is the Last Supper. It's in a convent near Milan, and Leonardo did not paint the doorway. It is actually a doorway. The monks of the place decided they needed to get through this wall, so they put a doorway there. That's the Last Supper fresco. It's now online. Google has scanned it in very high definition, so you can go find it. There's the address. And if you zoom in on a part, this is the salt being spilled, you can actually see the grains of salt. The definition is that good. Now, it didn't always look that good. This is what it looked like before World War II. This is in 1652 it was painted. There's the doorway underneath it. When the war came, they tried to protect it, and you can see what happened to the building. It's a miracle that wall wasn't destroyed, but it was safe behind the sandbag, so we've still got it today. And then, of course, we've got the Mona Lisa, painted somewhere between either 1503 and 1506 or 1503 to 1517. They're not quite sure. It seems like he took about 20 years to do this, but we're not 100% sure. Who it is? Well, the conventional thinking is Lisa del Giocondo, and you can see over on the left what I was just describing to you, Mona Lisa behind a plastic shield, and covered by people trying to take photographs of it. And over on the right, you see what it looks like. And everybody, I'm sure, in this room has seen that before, right? Anybody not seen that before? You haven't seen the Mona Lisa? Really? Wow. Well, I bet you haven't seen this one either. This is the Isleworth Mona Lisa, painted between 1501 to 1505, revealed only in 2012. Nobody knew about the existence of this. It was originally discovered in an English manor house in 1913, and then it was kept secret for a long time. And it was only revealed to the public in 2012. And look at it, compared to the one you just saw. Well, if your memory's not that good, here's the two together. It's almost like he practiced. We have two Mona Lisas. The one on the right is the one in the Louvre. The one on the left is the Isleworth Mona Lisa. This is Leda and the Swan. It's a lost work, meaning we don't have the original. What we do have is 9 copies, and here are 2 examples. Over on the left, Cesare de Sesto, somewhere between 1505 and 1510 to do it. Over on the right, it is Melzi's version of Leonardo's work. And you can see they're both very similar, meaning they're probably quite good copies of what the original was like in terms of the layout of what you see there. So, if you're not familiar with that legend, the swan is Zeus. Leda is being seduced by the swan. Not quite sure how that works, but anyway. And then the eggs contain Castor and Pollux. One of them was immortal, the other was not. And the immortal one gave up his immortality to be with his brother. The other 2 are Helen of Troy, and Clytemnestra. Those are the babies in the eggs. Sometimes Leonardo changed his work. Over on the left we have the original painting. In the middle we have a transition period, and on the right is what we have today. This was discovered using a technique known as reflective light by a Parisian scientist. That was done in 2014. The woman in the picture is Cecilia Gallerani, and as you can see in the very first picture there is no ermine, and in the last picture there is an ermine. And it's amazing how we can go back underneath the layers of these paintings to try and pull stuff out. Let's see what's under there. Lost and found, over on the left we have a drawing in 1499, that's established, and over on the right is the painting that was discovered 500 years later. When you compare the two, it seems pretty clear who did that, and Leonardo did the drawing, therefore Leonardo did the painting. That's Isabella d'Este, a Renaissance noblewoman, so we actually know who that was. What about his sculptures? Because that was one of the things he learned to do. He could sculpt. Well, we don't have anything. His busts, some examples of what they might look like over on the right, all gone, destroyed, lost, no idea. And then 2 great sculptural projects that he began on, which I'll show you an example of in a second, again, not finished. There are a couple of copies of these that I've listed there that we can see. This horse is believed to either be Leonardo's work or one of his followers. Again, not 100% sure, he doesn't sign anything. The rider was not there originally, so it's only the horse that is from Leonardo's shop. You'll find that in Budapest. Engineering and science, he's well known for this, of course. This is a bridge that he designed, and the kind of work that he did is in those fields that I've listed there on this slide. This bridge was supposed to be built, and in fact there was a news article here in some years ago, 2013. This bridge was supposed to go over the Bosphorus. That's what he designed it for. Well, we're still waiting. Despite the fact they announced they were actually going to build it, we're still waiting. It hasn't been built. But we do have this one. It's in Norway. Much smaller, of course, and it is a pedestrian bridge. There it is in reality, and near Ars, Norway, a pedestrian crossing. So that's Leonardo's design. That one did come to fruition. He invented lots of things. Here's some examples of some of the things that he invented that have been brought to life in one of the many museums of Leonardo around the world. Can't remember where I took these. Over on the top we have a bicycle. Down on the bottom left we have a conversion of rotary motion to linear motion. Over on the right we have a flying machine. That's supposed to be a helicopter. And of course he invented the parachute too. All of them from drawings in his work. Then there is this, a self-propelled car that he developed. He didn't build it, but it's been built since, and it looks like this. Remarkable. He also built a tank. That's a tank for warfare. Each one of those spindles sticking out is a cannon. And that's been recreated as well. Da Vinci tank. Wasn't the most serious program that I took this clip from.
Perform what you're supposed to do. Really find out.
This map was given to Caesar Borgia. It is a map of his stronghold. It was created in 1502. This is a city map. As far as I know, this is the first city map to have ever been created with this level of detail. When Borgia held this in his hand and looked at his city in plan form, he was just blown away and became a patron of Leonardo for some time. Leonardo was fascinated with water. These two drawings are showing you the flow of water. He was trying to capture the flow of water in a two-dimensional drawing. These are dated in 1508 to 1509, also in his notebooks. Over on the right, there is an extract from one of his notebooks, and what most scholars have focused on is this drawing here of the old woman. But in fact, when you look at the text, what he's talking about is friction. One object sliding over another object, and of course being retarded by friction. He is the first person we know of that talked about friction, at least in a documented form. It wasn't until 200 years later that another scientist started to look at friction. So another first for Leonardo. Astronomy. Well, unfortunately in astronomy he was mostly wrong, actually. Although one of the things he did realize was the light coming from the moon wasn't coming from the moon, it was coming from the sun, and it was being reflected to us. But with regards to his other thinkings in astronomy, he got that mostly wrong. One thing he did try and answer, and was a constant question of people of the time, was the heavenly bodies as they moved through the sky, did they make any noise? Well, they didn't understand what we understand today. They didn't realize that was a vacuum up there. They didn't realize that in vacuum there was no sound. But nonetheless, he reasoned that they couldn't, but not for the reasons that we understand today. He had several different reasons, none of which make any logical sense today. He dabbled in mathematics, and like many people, was able to prove the Pythagorean theory. And in fact, in 1927, there were 371 separate proofs of the Pythagorean theory. And then 520 was the final collection that was published in a book in 1986 to 1997, that period. And Leonardo is one of them that has yet another proof for the Pythagorean theorem. He invented many things, some of them very useful. You see a rolling press there on the right in the animation, a lens grinder, a rolling mill, and all of these things from his mind, never built. We have it in all the documents that we've collected from him. He invented a diving suit, whereby you could go under the water. There was a tube which would give you air from the surface and would allow you to look down at the bottom of the river, or maybe even go into the sea. So again, another first for him. And he made another invention which he kept secret because he thought it was so terrible. And it was this, the submarine. He called it his ship to sink another ship. And because he was so horrified by what he actually invented, he kept it secret. Nobody knew about it until it was found in the documents. And of course, years ahead, it's not till the Civil War that we end up with an actual submarine. This is in 1776, the American Turtle, that was used in the American Civil War. And over on the right there, you can see a figure of sitting inside of the submarine. He invented a hang glider. Again, never built. It was built by Robbie Whittam, and he tried to fly it. He had to add a tail for it actually to work, but nonetheless, Leonardo came up with the hang glider first of all. It wasn't until 2002 that it flew properly, and that was with the modification that Leonardo hadn't foresaw. He invented the viola organista. He didn't build it again. There's an example of it in 1575 that's built there. We again only know it from the drawings. So that's the first bowed keyboard instrument to ever be developed, but nobody knew about it because he didn't tell anyone. Drawings, well, you've seen some of the drawings already. We'll look at some more. And these are the codexes and the number of pages that are in them, and there's the locations of the different codexes around the world. And you can see some extracts from those codexes up on the screen showing the quality of the drawings. Quite remarkable, especially the anatomy. And how did he get to be so skilled with anatomy? I'll get to that in a minute. Again, you see some mathematics in here. This is out of the Codex Forster. Mirror writing, it's going backwards. To understand how the human body was put together, he would have to dissect corpses, which he did. This was not an uncommon practice of those times. He's not the only philosopher scientist to have done this. Michelangelo also did this to try and understand the anatomy of the human body. One of the ones that he actually dissected was that of a 100-year-old man. I'll get to that in just a second. But look at the drawing over on the left, which is Leonardo's, and then look at the reconstruction over on the right. Quite remarkable. This is the 100-year-old man I was talking about, and he recognized cirrhosis of the liver in that individual, so he was able to see the effect of alcohol on an individual's liver and recognize it for what it was. So he made some actually landmark observations, which again, kept secret. Another drawing, 1508, just the head of a woman. You'll find that in Palma Galleria Nacional. Quality is amazing. These are drawings of the horse sculpture that he was commissioned to do that he never did. There was a tray model that existed, but unfortunately it was destroyed by the French in 1499. We have a couple of replicas. One was in Milan, and the other one, I have no idea why, but it is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the United States. And you see an example of a reconstruction of the horse, and over on the right you see the drawings for that sculpture. Here's some more. Here's a detail from the Battle of Anghiari there, and over on the left he put together a complex solid whose name I leave up there for you to decipher. Perspective. He is one of the early painters using perspective. Look at the corner over here, taking your view off into the background. Perspective was not very common amongst paintings until this period when people like Leonardo were starting to incorporate them. Here's another example of perspective. This is the Adoration of the Magi, about 1481, and you could see the lines going off into the distance, giving you a perspective point. He was also the earliest known example of anamorphism. So when you're looking at the painting head on, it looks distorted. What you have to do is move to the side and look at it from an angle, which is what you're seeing over on the left side, and then the picture turns and you see what he was really trying to depict. This one we're not quite sure about. We think he drew this. This is the Mona Vanna, a nude Mona Lisa, about 1515. We do know that the artist that drew this was left-handed, which fits. It is a Leonardo technique in drawing this, but the attribution, as I have said on the slide, is not 100% certain whether that's Leonardo or not. Would have been nice if he'd signed everything and then we'd know for sure, but he didn't. What about his personal life? Well, he never married, he never had children, so that line went away. He may have had ADHD, which explains a lot of the problems he had in focusing and doing things and actually completing tasks. He was mostly a vegetarian. It is believed he was probably a passive homosexual, but we have no definitive proof of that. But reading some of his works, it indicates that. He absolutely loved animals. He is notorious for having gone through markets and released animals from cages, causing the vendors no end of hardship. I have to comment on this very briefly. There was a TV program, I think it was some time ago, where he had a love interest, Caterina da Cremona, who is perhaps the subject of Vida and the Swan. Well, that's absolute rubbish. There never was a love interest between him and any woman. Procrastination, I've said this many times. This slide basically puts it all together. The Last Supper that you saw in the monastery, the convent, was only finished when they threatened to cut off funding to him. The Mona Lisa took about 20 years to complete for whatever reason, and many of his other things just weren't completed. He was hounded by creditors. He never published, of course, and this plagued him all through his life. Procrastination is the result of a fantasy manufactured to avoid imperfection. And certainly in Leonardo's state of mind, if you look at the drawings, you look at the writings, you look at the engineering and science, he was clearly a man that wanted perfection. And maybe that was his downfall in the procrastination, although it could also very likely be the ADHD. In Latin, up there, the English says, tell me if anything ever got done," reputed perhaps to be his last words, but it was a phrase that he was known to repeat many times. He did recognize his own difficulties in trying to get things done. But nonetheless, these groundbreaking observations that he made in human anatomy, like everything else, I can't repeat this enough. He just never published it. It all remained secret all through his life. It's only when we started going back into these documents we understood how good he was. There was a paper published in 2019 about his ADHD. speculating on what could this man have done if he actually finished things, we would have had a lot more coming down to us through the years than we do have now, unfortunately. Then there's Michelangelo. The two of them hated each other, literally. Vasari documents this. There is a quote there from an argument that was held in one of the squares in Florence. Michelangelo says, "Now explain it yourself, horse modeler that you are, who, unable to cast a statue in bronze, were forced to give up the attempt in shame." And Leonardo stalked off. This animosity culminated in a competition in Florence. The Palazzo Vecchio, which some of you have perhaps been to, both artists were hired to paint one of the walls in there, and they were to be judged who was the better of the two. Leonardo's effort is shown over on the right. This is what he was going to do. It is believed that he began it with a new technique and the paint ran. That's now been covered up by one of Vasari's paintings in the hall in the Palazzo Vecchio. Michelangelo's effort is shown over on the left, and that wasn't finished either. But nonetheless, the failure to finish this basically caused Leonardo to leave Florence. The final years then of Leonardo, he leaves Florence, he goes to France, he's offered a place there by the King of France. Remember, he impressed the King of France. He lives and dies at Clos Luce, which is shown here in the picture on the right. This is Leonardo on his deathbed, and in the painting, it seems he is dying in the King's arms. That's the King of France there. These are supposedly his last words. "I have offended God and mankind by doing so little with my life," recognizing his own procrastination. Unfortunately, it's thought that this is apocryphal, and in fact the king wasn't even in France at the time. He was somewhere else when Leonardo passed away, so we're not 100% sure. This is not the only painting that shows this. It's just one of several. He is buried in the chapel there at the Chateau d'Amboise. This is his grave over on the right. And what Francis I says in 1539, there had never been another man born in the world who knew as much as Leonardo, not so much about painting, sculpture, and architecture, as that he was a very great philosopher. That original grave, we don't know. It was destroyed in the French Revolution. Bones were recovered and reburied in the grave that you see now, but it is not 100% sure if those bones that lie there are actually those of Leonardo. There is a thought that the lock of hair shown here over on the right could perhaps be used to authenticate the bones, but the Uffizi Gallery thinks that that lock of hair is very unlikely to be that of Leonardo to start with. So we don't know if the lock of hair is authentic, we don't know if the bones are authentic, so to do a test between two very uncertain objects doesn't seem to be coming anytime soon. These are some views of where Leonardo lived. You can visit this place. He lived well in the last days of his life. Then in popular culture, of course, we have the Da Vinci Code, and his surname, if you didn't already know that, is not Da Vinci. The Da means from, Leonardo from Vinci, so Vinci if anything. Read it? Anyone? Few of you? Good read. And that brings me to the end of a brief biography of a very great philosopher. At 11 o'clock, I'll do Science Cafe up there. And also, if you're staying on board, I'm going to talk about the Mediterranean Sea this afternoon at 4:30.